as you pursue prayer ministry with the children that you influence, it's also helpful to partner it with a sort of curriculum and a culture of conversational prayer. I find that there are two sides of the same coin, because once we want our children to connect with God in prayer through prayer ministry, we're still making them reliant on us. And the goal, well, my goal, is to get our children connected to God by themselves, that they can face to face meet with God at any moment of their day, in any situation of their life, that they know how to access his voice and his face, that they know how to share their whole heart with him and receive his whole heart and his gifts and live his fruit. And because we want that two-way, vibrant conversation with God, that walking alongside journey with God, that when we introduce prayer ministry, it gives them a taste of what they want, and they want more. And it's really helpful to bring alongside of that a culture of conversational prayer. The way I tend to teach conversational prayer is I completely sidestep the issue of prayer, because I find that kids bring their own baggage of prayer. They just sort of, prayer is talking at God, leaving an answering machine message on his thing. He only answers back sometimes, and sometimes it's no. They bring back all of this. You have to sit still and be quiet and say, dear God and amen, and do it at bedtimes and dinner times. And they bring all of their stuff of prayer, and trying to say prayer is something slightly different I find difficult. And so in my sheer laziness, I began to call it something else. I began to call it chat and catch. And chat and catch implies for me a casual, intimate, nothing off the table relationship with God. And it releases kids from the formula that we have given them. Sometimes we give them a formula, and instead of giving them a safety net and a place for them to feel confident in, instead we have slammed a structure on them that they feel they are trapped in. And so instead of releasing them, they feel like they have to say dear God and say thank you and say sorry and say please and then say amen, and they finish it. And when they say amen, they hear the end and they move on with life without God. And every once in a while they can reach up and talk at God for a little bit. And chat and catch is a way of telling your kids that every moment of life is with God. And that as we chat to God about every bit of us, God chats back from every bit of him. And our bodies and our hearts are designed to catch all of his communication and all of his gifts and everything that he wants to do in us. That's the basis of Chat and Catch. And if you want to know more, there's more on the website that on www.shackattheback.com that of how curriculum of how to introduce this to your children. There is resources on how to introduce it with under 5s and 5 to 11s. There's more about Chat and Catch. There's multimedia of me teaching Chat and Catch. But I just wanted to introduce this idea of Chat and Catch. And moreover, how you take the ideas of Chat and Catch and put it into a Sunday morning program or a midweek program, because it's not just about prayer. I found that sometimes kids begin to compartmentalize talking to God so much that there's life and then there's talking to God, and talking to God is small and insignificant compared to life. And if we want our kids to walk every day and every moment in communication and contact with him, then we need to be modeling that within our kids' ministry. And I just wanted to give you a few ideas of how you can begin to drip feed Chat and Catch into life in your ministry, instead of just the section of your ministry where you're supposed to be talking to God. One way to do it is to insert it right in the middle of your kids' ministry. I tend to change the way I do curriculum. I first started off doing curriculum, and I could do curriculum pretty well. Like, I can teach a session pretty well. Kids will be engaged, they'll love it, it'll be fun, they'll be with me, they'll stay engaged through the whole program. If God shows up, that's nice, but not necessary. And I began to sort of create structure where connecting with God was a very small part. And when I began to look at Chat and Catch, I began to want to put it smack in the middle of my ministry, that a session would completely fail if my kids didn't connect with God in a significant way. So I would suggest when you do your normal teaching, however you do your teaching, instead of saying, and this is what it means, and then sending them into small groups to do an activity about it, to take that time and say, this is what happened in Scripture. What does God want to do with you about it? What do you want to chat with him about? And I would suggest you leave this space open and you basically lead prayer ministry from the front for everybody. You pray and say, God, please talk to these kids about what you are saying to them. And kids, we're going to be quiet. I just want you to catch what God is saying about David and Goliath to you today. And you wait and you check. And you do through your whole model of what we've already learned. But it means that the kids are connecting with God in a significant way in response to what you have been teaching. Other ways you can do it is once you've taught the kids Chat and Catch, I often begin to empower their one-on-one relationship with God by giving them time in my program to do their one-on-one relationship with God. So when they come in, I have journals for them and I say, welcome everybody, it's great to see you. This is your time with God. Grab your journals, grab some space, and you and God chat to each other, and you can catch or you can just soak in his presence. Do whatever you want. This is you and God time. Have a good time. And I just give them space at the beginning of my program to meet with God first and meet with God personally. If they don't want to, fine, you can lay there and be bored. I don't care what you do. It's your time with God. You can ignore him or talk to him, completely up to you. But I give them that time. I say, your relationship with God is your relationship with God, and this is your space to do that. That's another idea of using Chat and Catch by just empowering theirs on their own. Another way is to model that in front of them. We say we chat and catch in our minds a lot throughout the day. We all have this sort of running conversation with him in our minds of half sentences and random thoughts and gods, and it's going through our head all the time. But most kids don't know that. They only experience our corporate environment and they can't quite see into your head of what's happening. So I would suggest you begin to weave it through your session. When you welcome kids, don't close your eyes and make them sit still. Instead, launch into prayer without them even knowing. Just say, oh God, I'm so happy that everyone is here. Thank you for bringing them here. God, make your presence known. Help us draw near to you today. Okay, kids, I want you to come on over here and do this and do that. If you don't say, dear God, and you don't say amen, then you're just addressing the living God that lives with us and is here before we started talking to him and after we started talking to him. I would really encourage you to completely drop the word amen. I tell my kids, if you want to agree with me, go, I agree. And sometimes they do it and sometimes they don't. But our kids have been conditioned that amen means the end, and they can walk away from God after that. So I just drop saying it. I'll talk to God, and every once in a while I hear, I agree. And if they really agree with something, they'll say they agree, and I give them space to do that. But it doesn't mean that God's presence ends. Catching can also be modeled from the front. Often right before I lead ministry or before I end their time with God, I'll just sit and I'll think. And if a kid tries to ask me a question, I'll just say, can you wait a second? I'm catching from God right now. And they need to see modeled you connecting with God, you listening to God, you partnering with God, and you leading your program. And the more you can say, you know what, I'm not sure what to do right now. Hold on. I think we're going to do this. Allows them to see those moments and how often you connect with God and catch from him. You also talk about it. I tend to catch through words and pictures. I rarely catch things with my eyeballs. And you can begin to show them how each of their leaders catches differently and what that means in real life. The more we make it part of our culture and the part of how we do life, the more it will begin to seep into the very being of how they view the world and operate within it, instead of it just being how they pray in the little sliver that we give them. And the last thing I would encourage you to do is to not over stress about it. Sometimes our kids can get inoculated because we get a new idea. We're like, chat and catch, we're going to do this stuff. And then we talk about chat and catch nonstop, and there's 30,000 opportunities for them to chat and catch, and their little brains go, wow. And sometimes they're like, yes. And so you'll never know what your ministry is going to do. But if you notice the kids kicking back against it, or feeling that the chat and catch is getting a bit too much, don't worry about it. Chat and catch is not the only way to connect with God. You can soak in his presence. Sometimes I find that if we're pushing catch so much that we want them to hear from God and hear from God and hear from God, they begin to get stressed about it if we keep hammering on it, and it stops being releasing and it begins to be important. And the whole point of catching from God is that it's light and wonderful. If you're noticing your kids feeling overcatched, what I tend to do is tell them that it's not all conversation with God. Sometimes being in a room with God is all that we need. We can just be still and know that he is God. Sometimes I really like sitting in the car with my mom and not talking. And just that being together without having to talk is really releasing for kids. So I'll lay them on the floor and put on a song and just say, don't worry about talking to God. Actually, don't talk to God. I want you to just hang out with God in the room. And I just release all pressure off of them. So we hang out with God in the room. Sometimes I talk to them about emotions, and I train them that you can chat to God without words. You can just sit there and feel something, or you can play him a memory in your mind with no words. Just show him what your day looked like or something. And you just begin to give them different ways so that it's not all words and not all face to face, but there's endless amounts of it that can happen. Connection looks different with every child. We can go for a walk. You can give them cameras and say, take pictures of what you feel God is showing you right now. Chat and Catch is designed to be empowering and releasing. It's not designed to be forced. And so the more you introduce it and then back off and let them do their relationship with God, the better it's going to be for them. Chat and Catch can be an amazing tool, but it should never become a formula. If you want to know more about Chat and Catch, you can read the book Parenting Children for a Life of Faith. It's basically what I've learned in children's ministry, and I wanted to communicate it in a way that got to as many people as possible. So it's written for parents, but it's the same information that I meant for children's leaders. So that would give you some more tangible tools. If you want to talk to your children's leaders about it, then you can pass around that book. It's a useful tool, I think, for conversation and for getting parents on board with Chat and Catch. The more we do a different culture with our kids, the more we need to bring the parents alongside. And Parenting Children for a Life of Faith book will give them something to partner with you on. And there's a Parenting for Faith course. That's a DVD-based course that you can also do as a community and as a church, that you can walk together in growing children in connecting with God.